My name is Olivia Chen, and at 34, I thought I knew everything about my family. My husband James had always been my anchor, especially after losing my job as a marine biologist earlier this year. Our annual Thanksgiving gatherings at my sister Victoria's mansion were traditions I endured, despite the underlying tension that seemed to follow us like a shadow. None of us could have predicted how one cruel comment would expose decades of secrets. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in coastal Maine, I was always the odd one out in my family. While my parents Gerald and Diana Chen built their successful import-export business, and my older sister Victoria followed in their ambitious footsteps, I was the dreamer who spent hours by the shoreline, collecting specimens and documenting marine life in detailed journals. My fascination with the ocean puzzled my family, who measured success in profit margins and business acquisitions. "The ocean will never pay your bills, Olivia," my father would say whenever he found me with my nose in marine biology textbooks. My mother would nod in agreement, her disappointment barely concealed behind her practiced smile. Victoria, 5 years my senior, embraced our parents' values wholeheartedly. By the time she was 30, she had an MBA from Wharton, a VP position at a Fortune 500 company, and had married Bradley Thompson, heir to a banking fortune. Her waterfront mansion in Portland showcased her success with its floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture imported from Scandinavia, and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in an architectural magazine. I took a different path, pursuing my passion for marine biology through undergraduate and graduate studies. I scraped by on scholarships, research stipends, and part-time jobs as a tour guide at the local aquarium. My parents made it clear that they wouldn't finance what they considered a hobby degree. "When are you going to grow up and get a real job?" Victoria would ask during family gatherings, her voice dripping with condescension. Not everyone can play with fish for a living. Despite my family's lack of support, I thrived in my chosen field. I secured a position as a research scientist at the Gulf of Maine Research Institute, published papers in respected journals, and built a reputation as an expert on coastal ecosystem preservation. My modest salary covered the mortgage on my small cottage near the water and funded my simple lifestyle. I didn't have Victoria's luxury cars or designer wardrobe, but I had purpose and passion. Then I met James. It was during a coastal cleanup initiative 4 years ago. He volunteered to help, showing up in worn jeans and a faded navy sweatshirt. There was something compelling about his quiet confidence and the thoughtful way he listened when I explained the importance of removing microplastics from the shoreline. "You speak about the ocean like it's a living entity you personally know," he observed, helping me catalog the debris we'd collected. "It is alive," I replied, "and we're killing it slowly with our carelessness." He asked intelligent questions about my research, showing genuine interest rather than the glazed expressions I usually encountered when discussing my work. By the end of the day, we had exchanged numbers, and I found myself hoping he would call. James told me he worked in maritime operations, a vague description that I didn't press him on. He seemed uncomfortable talking about his work, and I respected his privacy. What mattered was how he made me feel, valued, understood, and supported in ways my family never had. Our relationship progressed quickly. Within 6 months, he had moved into my cottage, contributing to the mortgage and utilities, though I never asked about his finances. He traveled frequently for work, sometimes disappearing for weeks, with minimal communication, explaining it was the nature of his job. I accepted this as part of loving him, focusing on the quality of our time together rather than the quantity. My family, predictably, was less than impressed with James. "He's hiding something," Victoria insisted after meeting him at a rare dinner at my parents' house. "No one is that secretive unless they have something to hide." "He's just private," I defended, though a small part of me wondered if she might be right. My father was more direct. "What are his prospects, Olivia? How will he provide for you long term?" Maritime operations could mean anything from deckhand to shipping clerk. I bristled at their materialistic concerns. "He makes me happy. That's all that matters." My mother patted my hand with pitying condescension. "Happiness doesn't pay bills, darling." Despite their misgivings, James and I married in a simple ceremony on the beach. My family attended out of obligation, Victoria making her disapproval known by wearing an inappropriately formal gown and leaving early with a thin excuse about Bradley needing to prepare for an important meeting the next day. For 3 years, James and I built our life together in comfortable companionship. He continued his mysterious work travels, and I immersed myself in my research. We were happy in our modest life, or so I thought, until everything changed earlier this year. The institute faced sudden budget cuts, and my position was eliminated along with several others in my department. At 34, I found myself unemployed for the first time since college. The job market for specialized marine biologists was limited, especially if I wanted to stay in Maine, near the coastline I had dedicated my career to protecting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. We'll figure it out, James assured me, surprisingly calm about our financial situation. I have some savings we can tap into. Take your time finding the right position. His savings, it turned out, were substantial enough to cover our expenses for months without strain. When I questioned this unexpected financial cushion, he explained it was from an inheritance he'd received years ago. It seemed plausible enough, though something about his explanation felt rehearsed. As weeks of unemployment stretched into months, my confidence began to falter. Job applications disappeared into the void, and the few interviews I secured ended with polite rejections. My specialized knowledge, once my greatest asset, now seemed to work against me as potential employers deemed me overqualified for entry-level positions and too specialized for broader roles. Victoria, of course, couldn't resist commenting on my situation. Our monthly family dinners, which I had always endured rather than enjoyed, became exercises in humiliation as she probed my unemployment like a sore tooth. "Have you considered retail? At least it would be something," she suggested during one particularly painful dinner. "Bradley knows the manager at the mall. I'm sure they'd find something for you." The thought of abandoning my field entirely felt like giving up on my identity. "I'm qualified for research positions, Victoria. I just need to find the right opportunity." She exchanged knowing looks with our parents. "Pride comes before a fall, Olivia." Throughout this difficult period, James remained my steadfast supporter. He never complained about being the sole provider, never suggested I lower my standards or abandon my field. Instead, he encouraged me to use this time to work on independent research, offering to fund a small project examining the impact of warming waters on local mussel populations. "Your work matters," he insisted when I expressed doubt about the project's value. "The world needs people who care about more than profit margins." His unwavering faith in me was a lifeline in the sea of my family's disappointment. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something James wasn't telling me. His phone calls often took place behind closed doors, and he had a separate laptop he never left open around me. When I questioned him about these peculiarities, he would smile and say, "Just boring work stuff, nothing interesting." As Thanksgiving approached, Victoria insisted on hosting at her mansion, as she had for the past 5 years. I dreaded the thought of spending hours under her scrutinizing gaze, fielding questions about my job search and listening to thinly veiled suggestions about my life choices. "We don't have to go," James offered the night before, sensing my anxiety. "We could have our own Thanksgiving here, just the two of us." The temptation to accept his offer was strong, but I knew skipping the family gathering would only lead to more criticism. "No, we should go. My absence would just give them more to talk about." He nodded, understanding the complicated dynamics at play. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that your worth isn't determined by your job title or bank account." Little did I know how prophetic his words would prove to be. Thanksgiving Day dawned cold and clear, the Maine coastline transformed by a light dusting of early snow. I spent extra time on my appearance, selecting a forest green dress that complemented my eyes, and carefully applying makeup to hide the stress lines that had appeared in recent months. James wore his navy blazer, the nicest item in his modest wardrobe, with khaki pants and a light blue shirt that brought out the silver in his eyes. "You look beautiful," he said, helping me with my coat. "Ready for battle?" I laughed, despite my nerves. "Is it that obvious?" Only to me. He kissed my forehead. "I have your back, always." Victoria's house was decorated for the occasion with tasteful autumn arrangements and strategically placed candles that cast a warm glow over imported furniture. Bradley greeted us with his usual distant politeness, taking our coats before returning to watch football in his state-of-the-art media room. My parents had already arrived and were sipping wine in the kitchen, while Victoria supervised her personal chef's final preparations. Olivia, James. My mother air-kissed my cheeks, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup. How lovely to see you both. My father gave James a firm handshake. Still in maritime operations, son? James nodded, his expression revealing nothing. Yes, sir. Still keeping busy. Victoria emerged from her pantry, immaculate in a designer dress that probably cost more than 3 months of our mortgage payments. You're finally here. Everyone else arrived on time. We were exactly 7 minutes late. Hardly a grievous social offense, but I bit back my retort. Traffic on the bridge was backed up. The dress looks wonderful on you, Victoria. She preened slightly at the compliment before turning to James with a critical eye. Same blazer as last year, James. At least it's holding up well. I felt him stiffen beside me, but his voice remained pleasant. I believe in quality over quantity. Victoria's twin sons, Alexander and Nicholas, raced through the kitchen, narrowly avoiding a collision with the chef. At 10 years old, they were bundles of energy barely contained in matching sweater vests and khakis. Boys! Victoria's voice cut through the air. What have I told you about running in the house? They skidded to a halt, offering identical apologetic smiles. Sorry, Mom, they chorused before noticing us. Aunt Olivia! Uncle James! The genuine affection in their greeting warmed my heart. Despite their mother's materialistic values, the twins were sweet boys who shared my love for the ocean. James knelt to their level, producing 2 small packages from his pocket. I found these on the shore last week and thought of you guys, he said as they eagerly unwrapped the gifts, polished stones with embedded fossils. Cool! Alexander held his up to the light. Is this a real ancient creature? About 400 million years old, James confirmed. From when much of this area was underwater. Victoria frowned at the interaction. Boys, go wash your hands for dinner, and don't get those rocks near the table. As they reluctantly trudged away, she turned to James with a tight smile. You don't need to bring them trinkets every time you visit. They have more than enough toys. They're not toys, I interjected. They're educational specimens. Victoria rolled her eyes. Of course they are. Dinner was served in Victoria's formal dining room, where a table that could comfortably seat 16 was set for 7, with the twins relegated to a separate children's table in the adjacent breakfast nook. The food was meticulously prepared and artfully presented: heritage turkey, cranberry compote with orange zest, stuffing with chestnuts and porcini mushrooms, and roasted vegetables arranged by color gradient. Bradley's company had an exceptional third quarter, Victoria announced as we passed the serving dishes. They're expanding the Asian division, and he's being considered to head the new operation. My father beamed with pride. Excellent news, Bradley. That would be quite a promotion. Bradley nodded, barely looking up from his phone. Still in negotiations, but it looks promising. Would mean relocating to Singapore for a few years. Singapore! My mother clasped her hands together. How exciting! The Chen family, going global. Victoria basked in the attention, detailing the expatriate package being offered, the international school options for the twins, and the exclusive neighborhood where they would likely live. I pushed food around my plate, feeling the familiar weight of comparison settling on my shoulders. Inevitably, the conversation turned to me. And how is your job search progressing, Olivia? My father asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. I'm exploring several options, I replied vaguely. The right position hasn't materialized yet, but I'm using this time to work on independent research. Victoria snorted delicately. Independent research doesn't pay bills. We're managing fine, James interjected, his hand finding mine under the table. Are you? Victoria raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. On a single maritime operations salary? What exactly do you do again, James? You've always been so vague about the details. The table fell uncomfortably silent. Even Bradley looked up from his phone, sensing the tension. "Victoria," my mother said with forced lightness, "perhaps we should discuss the Christmas plans." But Victoria was like a dog with a bone, unwilling to let go. "I'm simply expressing concern for my sister's welfare. Unemployment at her age could seriously impact her future prospects, especially in such a niche field. And with a husband whose career is so undefined." "My career is perfectly defined," James replied calmly. "I simply don't discuss it at length." "Because there's nothing to discuss?" Victoria pressed. "Or because you're ashamed of what you do?" "Victoria, that's enough," my father interjected, though I noticed he watched James with renewed interest. I felt my cheeks burning with humiliation and anger. My husband works hard, and we're comfortable. Not everyone measures success by square footage and car models. "Clearly," Victoria gestured around her immaculate dining room. "Some of us actually aspire to something beyond mediocrity." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. In the months of unemployment, I had battled doubts about my career choices, wondering if my family had been right all along about my impractical passion. "At least Olivia pursued something she believes in," James defended me. "There's honor in that." Victoria laughed, the sound brittle and cold. "Honor doesn't secure your future. Look at you both. In your 30s, living in a cottage barely bigger than my guest house, driving cars over a decade old, while Olivia pins her hopes on research positions that don't exist. It's pathetic, really." "Victoria," my mother gasped. "Someone needs to say it," Victoria continued, warming to her subject. "I'm tired of pretending that Olivia's choices haven't led her exactly where we all predicted. Unemployed and dependent on a husband who probably works on a fishing boat." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I think we should go." Victoria's eyes glittered with triumph. "Running away from the truth? The truth is, Olivia, you're worthless in the real world. Your degrees and your passion projects amount to nothing tangible. You've wasted your potential, and now you're paying the price." The dining room fell into shocked silence. Even Victoria seemed surprised by the cruelty of her own words. In my peripheral vision, I saw the twins watching wide-eyed from the breakfast nook, their dinner forgotten. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came. The accumulation of months of rejection, years of familial disappointment, and a lifetime of being the odd one out crashed over me like a tidal wave. For a horrible moment, I thought I might cry in front of them all. Then James stood beside me, his posture changing subtly. Gone was the easygoing, somewhat self-effacing man I knew. In his place stood someone with unmistakable authority, his spine straight, shoulders squared, chin lifted. When he spoke, his voice carried a commanding tone I had never heard before. "That's quite enough, Victoria." The room seemed to still at his words. "You know nothing about worth or value beyond monetary measurement, which is your loss. But I will not allow you to speak to my wife that way." Victoria blinked, momentarily thrown by his transformation. Then she recovered, doubling down. "And who are you to dictate how I speak in my own home? The mysterious husband with the vague job who can't even afford to buy a new blazer?" James looked at me, a question in his eyes. I nodded, not entirely sure what I was agreeing to, but trusting him completely in that moment. He turned back to my family, who were watching with expressions ranging from embarrassment to curiosity. "I think it's time for some honesty," he said quietly. "I've kept aspects of my life private at the request of my superiors, but I see now that my discretion has allowed unfair assumptions to flourish." "Superiors?" my father repeated, sitting up straighter. James reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather wallet. He flipped it open to reveal an identification card and badge that made my father's eyes widen in shock. "My name is Captain James Harrison Chen, United States Navy, currently serving as Deputy Commander of Naval Surface Forces Atlantic. I'm what you might call an Admiral, though my official title is slightly different. I've been with Naval Intelligence for 15 years, much of it in classified operations that I'm not at liberty to discuss even now. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's mouth hung open in an expression that would have been comical under different circumstances. My parents stared at James, as if seeing him for the first time. Bradley actually put his phone down. That's not possible, Victoria finally sputtered. You live in a cottage. You wear the same clothes year after year. You drive a 10-year-old Subaru. James smiled slightly. My salary and rank would allow for much more, yes. But Olivia and I choose to live simply. Material excess has never interested either of us. The cottage by the water makes her happy, and that's what matters to me. But why the secrecy? My father asked, looking genuinely bewildered. Why not tell us from the beginning? Operational security, initially, James explained. Much of my work is classified, and it's simpler to be vague than to constantly navigate what I can and cannot reveal. Later, it became apparent that my position would change how you viewed both me and Olivia. I didn't want that. He turned to Victoria, his expression hardening. As for Olivia being worthless, your sister is one of the most respected marine biologists in her field. Her research on microplastic accumulation in coastal ecosystems was instrumental in developing new naval protocols for waste management across the entire fleet. Her work literally changed how the United States Navy operates in sensitive marine environments. I stared at him in shock. What? You never told me that. I couldn't, he said simply. It was classified until recently. Your research was submitted anonymously through channels by a, quote, concerned environmental organization, which was actually me. Your findings were so compelling that they triggered a complete overhaul of our environmental impact procedures. He faced my family again. Olivia losing her position had nothing to do with her capabilities and everything to do with political budget cuts. She's been offered a position as a civilian consultant to the Navy's Environmental Protection Division, reporting directly to the Secretary of the Navy, but she doesn't know that yet, because the official offer wasn't supposed to arrive until next week. Quote, my head was spinning with revelations. James, what are you saying? He took my hand. I'm saying that while your family has been belittling your choices, the highest levels of naval command have been studying your research and implementing your recommendations. I'm saying that you've made more difference in the world than Victoria ever will with her profit margins and status symbols. Victoria had gone pale, her perfect composure shattered. I didn't know. No, James agreed. You didn't bother to find out. You were too busy judging based on appearances and bank accounts. My father cleared his throat. Admiral Chen, I apologize for our misconceptions. Had we known? That's exactly the problem, James interrupted. Your respect shouldn't depend on my rank or position. It should be based on how I treat your daughter, how happy we are together, the life we've built on mutual values. The same goes for Olivia. Her worth isn't measured by her employment status or salary, but by the integrity of her work and character. I found my voice at last. All these years you let them think you were just, what? Some kind of deckhand? I let them think whatever they wanted, James replied softly. I never actually lied. Maritime operations is technically accurate, just severely understated. A laugh bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me, slightly hysterical but genuine. My husband, the Admiral, and I had no idea. The dining room remained frozen in stunned silence as the implications of James's revelation rippled through my family. Victoria sat rigid in her chair, her perfectly manicured hand clutching her wine glass so tightly I feared it might shatter. My parents exchanged bewildered glances, clearly struggling to reconcile the modest, quiet son-in-law they'd dismissed, with the high-ranking naval officer now standing before them. Bradley for once seemed genuinely engaged in family dynamics rather than his phone. I think, my mother finally said, her voice unnaturally high, that we could all use some dessert. Victoria, shall we move to the living room for pie? The suggestion of normalcy in the face of such a dramatic revelation was so absurd that I nearly laughed out loud. Instead, I felt James's steady hand at my elbow. Actually, he said calmly, I think Olivia and I will be leaving now. Victoria seemed to snap out of her shock. But you can't just drop this bombshell and leave. We have questions, explanations. Which can wait for another time, James replied firmly. I believe you've said enough for one evening, Victoria. That's not fair, she protested, her voice losing its usual commanding edge. How was I supposed to know? You deliberately misled us all. I never lied, James corrected her. I simply allowed you to make assumptions based on your own biases. And regardless of my position, your treatment of Olivia was unacceptable. She's my sister, Victoria insisted, as if this explained everything. I was trying to motivate her, push her to do better. By calling her worthless? I found my voice at last, the shock giving way to a slow-burning anger. That's not motivation, Victoria. That's cruelty. I stood straighter, drawing strength from James's presence beside me and the knowledge that my research, my life's passion, had made a real difference in the world. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval, all of you. I've tolerated the snide comments, the backhanded compliments, the constant comparisons. But I'm done. I don't need your validation anymore. My father raised his hands in a placating gesture. Olivia, sweetheart, let's not be hasty. This is all just a misunderstanding. Victoria spoke out of turn, but she means well. Does she? I challenged, looking directly at my sister. Tell me honestly, Victoria. Do you actually care about my welfare? Or does my perceived failure just make you feel more successful by comparison? Victoria's face flushed, and for a moment, I saw something like guilt flash in her eyes before her defensive walls slammed back into place. That's ridiculous. Everything I've ever said was for your own good. Someone had to be realistic about your choices. Your version of realism, James interjected, seems remarkably narrow and materialistic. Victoria turned on him, finding a target for her embarrassment. And you? All this time letting us think you were some nobody when you're, what? Some kind of naval big shot? Why the deception? Were you laughing at us behind our backs? Enjoying our ignorance? Not at all, James replied evenly. I was respecting my wife's wish to be valued for who she is, not for her connections or status, something her family seems incapable of doing. The twins appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. Alexander clutched his fossil, eyes wide as they darted between the adults. Is Uncle James really an admiral? He asked, his voice tinged with awe. Victoria moved to shoo them away, but Nicholas dodged past her. That's so cool! Do you have a ship? Can we see it sometime? Despite everything, I smiled at their enthusiasm. Not today, guys. But maybe someday, if your mom agrees. We'll discuss it another time, Victoria said tightly, ushering the boys back toward the kitchen. Go finish your dessert. When she returned, her composure had been partly restored. I think we all need to take a step back and process this information. Obviously, there have been misconceptions on all sides. The only misconception, I replied, gathering my purse, was mine in thinking I needed your approval to validate my choices. James and I are leaving now. Thank you for dinner. My mother looked panicked. But it's Thanksgiving. We haven't even had dessert. We always have dessert together. Some traditions need to change, I said, feeling a strange lightness as I broke free from the pattern of appeasing my family at the cost of my dignity. I'll call you tomorrow, Mom. As James and I moved toward the door, my father stepped forward, blocking our path. Wait, please. This isn't how family discussions should end. He turned to James, his demeanor suddenly deferential. Admiral, surely you understand the importance of clearing the air, establishing proper protocols for moving forward. The change in his attitude was so transparent that I felt a fresh wave of disappointment. My father had never shown James this level of respect before learning his title. With all due respect, sir, James replied, his tone professional but firm. My rank is irrelevant to this situation. What matters is how you've treated your daughter, and by extension me, based solely on your perception of our worth, according to arbitrary measures of success. He placed a protective hand on my back. And right now my priority is my wife's well-being, not smoothing over family politics. We collected our coats from the hall closet, the silence thick with unspoken words. As James helped me into my coat, Victoria appeared beside us, her voice lowered to avoid being overheard by our parents. "This changes nothing, you know," she hissed. "So your husband has an impressive title. You're still unemployed, still wasted your potential on fish and seaweed." I should have been hurt, but instead, I felt a surprising calm. "That's where you're wrong, Victoria. This changes everything. Not because of James's position, but because I finally see clearly. I don't need your definition of success to be happy. I never did." Before she could respond, the front door opened, and Bradley appeared, car keys in hand. "Your car's been moved to the driveway," he said to James, his businesslike tone at odds with the family drama unfolding around him. Then, unexpectedly, he extended his hand. "Thank you for your service, Admiral." James shook it briefly. "Thank you, but please, it's still just James." As we stepped outside into the crisp November air, the door closed behind us with a definitive click. For a moment, we stood in silence, watching our breath form clouds in the cold. "I'm sorry," James said finally. "I know that wasn't how you wanted this evening to go." I took a deep breath, feeling the tension of the dinner slowly release from my shoulders. "Actually, I think it went exactly as it needed to. I just have one question." "Just one?" He raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "For now," I conceded. "Why didn't you tell me about my research being used by the Navy? All this time, I thought my work was just gathering dust on some academic shelf." James guided me toward our car, his expression turning serious. "It was classified, Liv. I was under strict orders not to disclose the implementation of your findings, even to you, especially since they came through unofficial channels." "You mean when you submitted my research pretending to be an environmental organization?" I clarified, still trying to process this revelation. He had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "I knew your work had value that wasn't being recognized. The Institute was underfunding your research, and the academic journals were too slow to publish findings that needed immediate attention. So I found another route. By essentially smuggling my research to the highest levels of Naval Command," I said, unable to keep the wonder from my voice. "Your data was compelling, Olivia. Once the right people saw it, the decision to implement your recommendations was inevitable. The change in waste management protocols alone has reduced our environmental impact by nearly 40% in vulnerable coastal areas." I leaned against our car, suddenly overwhelmed. All those years I doubted myself, wondered if my parents and Victoria were right about my choices being impractical, and meanwhile my work was actually making a difference. "A significant difference," James emphasized. "And that consultant position I mentioned? It's real. The offer letter should arrive early next week. Full security clearance, competitive salary, and most importantly, the chance to continue your research with proper funding and implementation pathways." The implications slowly sank in. "So when I lost my job, it was unfortunate timing," James acknowledged. "But I already knew the consultant position was being created with you in mind. I just couldn't tell you until the official channels had been navigated." I shook my head in disbelief. "All this time, you've been two people. My supportive husband, who supposedly worked in maritime operations, and Admiral Chen, Deputy Commander of Naval Forces." "I'm just one person, Liv," he said softly, taking my hands in his. "The man who fell in love with your passion and intelligence that day on the beach. The uniform and the rank are just details." "Pretty significant details," I countered, but without heat. "Why keep it from me for so long? Did you not trust me?" His expression grew serious. "Of course I trusted you. But when we met, I was involved in classified operations that required strict compartmentalization. By the time I could have told you safely, I realized something important. You loved me for who I was, not what I did or how much I earned. Do you know how rare that is?" I thought of Victoria and her constant status assessments, my parents and their materialistic measures of success. "I'm beginning to understand." And then, he continued, "I saw how your family treated you, how they dismissed your work and passion because it didn't translate to obvious wealth or status. I didn't want our relationship to suddenly gain their approval just because of my rank. I wanted them to see your value, our value, without external validation. The headlights of a passing car briefly illuminated his face, and I saw the genuine concern in his eyes. Maybe that was selfish or misguided. If it was, I'm sorry. I leaned forward and kissed him gently. It wasn't selfish. Complicated, yes, but I understand your reasoning. We drove home in contemplative silence, the events of the evening settling around us like the light snow that had begun to fall. Our cottage looked particularly welcoming as we pulled into the driveway, its simple lines and warm windows, a stark contrast to Victoria's ostentatious mansion. Inside, I kicked off my heels and sank onto our worn but comfortable couch, suddenly exhausted. James disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with 2 glasses of wine. "Some Thanksgiving," I murmured, accepting the glass gratefully. "We still have leftover turkey in the fridge from our early celebration yesterday," he offered. "And that cranberry sauce you made." I smiled at the reminder of our private Thanksgiving dinner the previous evening, a simple, joyful meal without pretense or judgment. Maybe later. Right now, I just need to process everything. James settled beside me, his solid presence a comfort after the emotional turbulence of the evening. "Where would you like to start?" "With the truth," I said decisively. "All of it. No more classified restrictions or half explanations. I want to know exactly who I'm married to, Admiral Chen." For the next 2 hours, James shared details of his career that had previously been off-limits, his early years in naval intelligence, his rapid rise through the ranks, the classified operations that had taken him away for weeks at a time. He explained the nature of his current role overseeing naval surface operations for the Atlantic Fleet, a position that carried significant responsibility and influence. The frequent trips to Washington, I mused as pieces fell into place. The secure phone calls behind closed doors. The mysterious laptop. All part of the job, he confirmed. I've been able to work remotely for much of it, which is why we could live here rather than near the base. But some aspects required absolute security measures. "And the money?" I asked, remembering how easily he had supported us during my unemployment. "You mentioned savings, an inheritance. My salary as an admiral is substantial," he acknowledged. "But I've lived simply for most of my career, investing rather than spending." The inheritance was partially true. My grandmother did leave me something when she passed, but it was modest. Mostly I've just been careful with my earnings. I shook my head in wonder. All this time we could have been living in a house like Victoria's, driving luxury cars, taking expensive vacations. "Is that what you wanted?" he asked quietly. The question gave me pause. I thought about our cottage with its creaky floors and spectacular ocean views, our comfortable, if unfashionable furniture, the simple pleasures of our life together. No, I realized. This is exactly what I wanted. I just didn't know we had other options. "We always had options," James said. "But this life, this simplicity, it's what makes you happy. And seeing you happy makes me happy." I leaned against his shoulder, feeling a curious mixture of emotions, lingering anger at Victoria's cruelty, confusion about James's long deception, pride in learning that my research had made a real impact, and underlying it all, a growing sense of liberation from my family's expectations. "I can't believe Victoria called me worthless," I said after a while, the words still stinging despite everything else that had happened. "After all these years, that's what she really thinks of me." James's arm tightened around me. Victoria measures worth in dollars and status. By those metrics, most of humanity would fall short. But there are better ways to measure a life's value. Like changing naval environmental protocols, I suggested with a small smile. "Like that," he agreed. "But also like treating people with kindness and respect. Like pursuing work that matters to you, rather than chasing approval. Like building a relationship based on genuine connection rather than mutual advantage." His words soothed something raw inside me. I've spent my whole life feeling like the family disappointment. The underachiever. The impractical dreamer who couldn't translate her passion into visible success. And now? I considered the question carefully. Now I know that success looks different for different people. Victoria needs her mansion and luxury cars and social status to feel successful. I need to know my work matters, that I'm contributing something meaningful. Quote. And it does matter, James assured me, more than Victoria or your parents ever understood. A thought occurred to me suddenly. The consulting position you mentioned, is it a real job or a consolation prize created by my Admiral husband? It's very real, he said firmly, and it has nothing to do with our marriage. The recommendation came through normal channels, based solely on your qualifications and the impact of your previous research. I recused myself from any involvement in the selection process precisely to avoid this question. Relief washed over me, so I earned it on my own merits. Absolutely, James confirmed. Though I will admit to some pride in knowing my wife was the top candidate without any influence from me. I sat up straighter, a new determination taking root. Then I want to accept the position. Not to prove anything to Victoria or my parents, but because it sounds like work that matters. James smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners in the way I loved. I was hoping you'd say that. The official offer should arrive by courier on Monday. Once you accept, you'll need to go through security clearance procedures, but given your clean record, that should be straightforward. And then what? Do we move closer to a base? Change our lifestyle to match your rank? That's entirely up to us, he said. Many officers in my position live more ostentatiously, but there's no requirement to do so. We can stay right here if that's what you want. I looked around our modest living room, at the bookshelves crammed with marine biology texts and novels, the coffee table made from driftwood we'd collected together, the watercolor paintings of tide pools I'd created during a particularly inspired summer. I do want that, but I also want to stop hiding who we are, both of us. Number more hiding, James agreed. Though I should warn you, once word gets out about my position, people may treat us differently. Your family certainly will. Let them, I said with newfound confidence. I'm done seeking their approval. Victoria called me worthless in front of everyone, and while I know intellectually that her opinion shouldn't matter emotionally, it still hurts, James finished for me. Of course it does. She's your sister, and despite everything, you care what she thinks. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. But I'm not going to let that hurt define me anymore, or let her definition of success determine my choices. James raised his wine glass. To making choices based on what matters to us, not others' expectations. I clinked my glass against his, feeling a strange mixture of emotional exhaustion and newfound clarity, and to no more secrets between us. As we sat together in the quiet of our cottage, the waves crashing against the shore outside, I realized that despite the disaster of the Thanksgiving dinner, I felt more peaceful than I had in months. The constant need for validation from my family had been a weight I'd carried for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand unburdened by their expectations. What are you thinking? James asked, noticing my contemplative expression. That sometimes it takes a crisis to show you what really matters, I replied. And that being called worthless by my sister might be the best thing that ever happened to me. He raised an eyebrow skeptically. The best thing? Well, I amended with a small smile. Maybe the second best. After marrying an admiral in disguise. Later that night, as we prepared for bed, my phone lit up with notifications. 3 missed calls from my mother, 2 from my father, and a text from Victoria that simply read, "We need to talk." I showed the screen to James. They're in damage control mode. What do you want to do? He asked, leaving the decision entirely to me. I switched the phone to silent and placed it face down on the nightstand. Nothing tonight. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out what happens next with my family. As I drifted towards sleep in the safety of our bedroom with James's steady breathing beside me and the rhythmic sound of waves against the shore, one thought crystallized in my mind. Worth isn't assigned by others or measured in possessions. It's determined by the impact we have, the integrity we maintain, and the love we share. By those measures, I was anything but worthless, and it had taken my sister's cruelty and my husband's revelation to help me finally see it. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through our bedroom window and the distant cry of seagulls. For a moment, I lay still, savoring the peace before memories of Thanksgiving dinner came rushing back. Victoria's cruel words, James's shocking revelation, the dramatic exit we'd made from my sister's house. It felt almost dreamlike in the morning light, too theatrical to be real. But the reality was confirmed when I rolled over and saw James already awake, reading something on his secure tablet. Without his usual casual clothes, dressed instead in a navy t-shirt that emphasized his athletic build, he looked different somehow, more commanding, the authority I'd glimpsed last night no longer hidden. "Morning," he said, setting the tablet aside. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've stepped into someone else's life," I admitted. "Everything looks the same, but nothing actually is." He nodded in understanding. Identity shifts can be disorienting, even when they're positive. "Take it slow today." I reached for my phone, bracing myself for the onslaught of messages that would surely have accumulated overnight. Sure enough, there were 7 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my father, and multiple texts from Victoria ranging from defensive, "You completely overreacted," to apologetic, "I shouldn't have said that word," to demanding, "Call me immediately, we need to fix this." "They're in full crisis management mode," I observed, showing James the screen. "Not surprising," he replied. "Your family has just had their entire perception of reality upended. How do you want to handle it?" I considered the question carefully. I need time to process everything before I engage with them. Especially Victoria. "Take all the time you need," James said, kissing my forehead before heading to the shower. "I'm not due at the base until Monday." The mention of the base, a concrete reminder of James's actual profession, sent a fresh wave of adjustment through me. For 4 years I had been married to a man whose career I only vaguely understood. Now I needed to reconcile my easygoing husband with Admiral Chen, Deputy Commander of Naval Forces. While James showered, I sent a single text to my mother. "Need some space to process everything. We'll call in a few days." Then I silenced my phone again and went to make coffee. Our Friday unfolded with unusual leisure. Normally James would be working remotely at this hour, but today he suggested a walk along the shore. The November air was crisp, the beach nearly deserted, except for a few dedicated dog walkers in the distance. We strolled hand in hand, the familiar landscape somehow new through the lens of recent revelations. "I keep thinking about all the times my family dismissed my research," I said as we watched waves crash against the rocky shoreline. "All those condescending comments about playing with fish or wasting my education on environmental studies." "And now you know the truth," James replied. "Your work has literally changed how the most powerful navy in the world operates in coastal environments." I shook my head in wonder. It still doesn't seem real. All those years of feeling like the family disappointment, and my research was actually making a significant impact. "That's the problem with measuring success through others' eyes," James observed. "Your family could only see what was visible, your modest salary, your lack of obvious status symbols. They couldn't see the real impact of your work because it didn't fit their metrics." We paused to watch a pair of sandpipers darting along the water's edge, their synchronized movements like a well-rehearsed dance. "I've been thinking about worth," I said. "Not just about what Victoria said, but about how we assign value to ourselves and others." "And what have you concluded?" James asked, his voice gentle. "That I've been using the wrong measurements my entire life. I let my family's definition of success become my yardstick, even while rejecting it outwardly. I pursued my passion, yes, but I still felt like a failure because I wasn't achieving in ways they valued." James nodded encouragingly. "And now? Now I see that real worth isn't about salary or status or possessions. It's about impact, contribution, the difference you make, whether or not anyone applauds it." I turned to face him directly. "You saw that in me from the beginning, didn't you? The potential impact of my work, even when I couldn't see it myself." "I saw a woman who cared deeply about something that mattered," he confirmed. "Someone who pursued excellence not for recognition, but because the work itself was important. That kind of integrity is rare, Olivia, and incredibly attractive." His words warmed me more than any compliment about my appearance ever could. "Thank you for seeing me, the real me, when my own family couldn't." "They weren't looking," James said simply. They were too focused on their own definitions of success to see yours. We continued our walk, discussing the consulting position I would soon be offered and what it would mean for my career. For the first time in months, I felt genuine excitement about my professional future, untempered by anxiety about measuring up to my family's expectations. When we returned home, there was a sleek black car with government plates parked in our driveway. A woman in a naval uniform stood beside it, her posture crisp, even in the casual setting. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," James greeted her with a nod. "I wasn't expecting you today." "Admiral Chen," she replied with perfect military precision. "Apologies for the unscheduled visit, sir. There's been a development that requires your immediate attention. The secure packet is in the vehicle." I watched in fascination as James seamlessly transitioned into his command role, his posture straightening, his voice taking on an authoritative edge I rarely heard at home. "Very well. I'll review it now. Wait here, please." He turned to me with an apologetic smile. "Duty calls, it seems. This shouldn't take long." "Go ahead," I encouraged him. "I'll start lunch." As I headed inside, I heard Lieutenant Commander Hayes ask quietly, "Is that your wife, sir, the marine biologist?" "It is," James confirmed. "Why do you ask?" "The secretary specifically mentioned her research in last week's environmental briefing, sir. Her work on microplastic degradation patterns is apparently groundbreaking." I didn't catch James's response as I closed the door behind me, but the casual mention of my research in such high-level contexts sent a wave of validation through me. Not that I needed external confirmation anymore, but it was powerful nonetheless to hear my work referenced so naturally by military personnel who had no idea I was listening. Inside, I moved around our kitchen with a newfound lightness, assembling ingredients for a simple lunch. The cottage that had sometimes felt like a symbol of my modest success now represented something different, a deliberate choice to live simply and authentically rather than chasing status symbols we didn't value. James returned 20 minutes later, the professional mask slipping away as he closed the door. "Sorry about that. There's a situation developing near the Azores that needed my input." "No need to apologize," I assured him. "It's your job. An important one, apparently." He smiled, helping me finish preparing lunch. "It still feels strange, doesn't it? Having these two worlds suddenly collide." "Very strange," I agreed. "But also oddly liberating. No more secrets, no more vague explanations about your maritime operations trips." We ate at our small kitchen table, the conversation flowing easily between domestic matters and the newly opened subject of James's naval career. I asked questions I'd never been able to ask before, and he answered as fully as security protocols permitted. "There's something I've been wondering," I said as we cleared the dishes together. "All those times Victoria made snide comments about your job or our lifestyle, weren't you tempted to set her straight? To let her know who she was really talking down to?" James considered the question carefully. "Sometimes, briefly. Especially when she was particularly condescending toward you. But revealing my position would have only changed how she treated us because of my rank, not because she suddenly respected our choices. And that matters to you, being valued for who you are rather than your position." "It does," he confirmed. "In my world, rank often overshadows the person. People defer to the uniform, not necessarily the individual wearing it. With you, and even with your family's misguided judgments, I was just James. It was refreshing." I understood then another dimension of his decision to keep his rank private. "You wanted a space where you weren't always the Admiral." Exactly. A place where I could just be a man who loves tide pools and marine biology lectures, and his passionate scientist wife. The afternoon passed quietly as we adjusted to our new reality together. I began researching the security clearance process I would need to navigate for the consulting position, while James handled some non-classified correspondence. It felt surprisingly normal. This new version of our life where his career was no longer shrouded in vague terminology. Around 4 o'clock, a text arrived from an unexpected source. My nephew Alexander. "Aunt Olivia, Is Uncle James really an admiral? Mom won't talk about Thanksgiving, but she's been crying and Dad is being weird. The message tugged at my heart. The twins were innocent bystanders in the family drama, and they deserved some explanation. After consulting with James, I replied, yes, he is, but he's still the same Uncle James who brings you fossils and tells ocean stories. Grown-ups sometimes have complicated feelings about things. Your mom and I need some time to sort them out. We both love you very much. Alexander's response came quickly. Cool. Can we see his ship sometime? Nicholas wants to know too. I smiled at the simplicity of children's priorities. Maybe someday. That's something to discuss later. How are you doing? Okay, I guess. Mom made us delete the pictures we took at Thanksgiving because she said the lighting was bad, but I think it's because she looks weird in them. Are you mad at us too? Absolutely not, I typed emphatically. I could never be mad at you and Nicholas. What happened at Thanksgiving was between grown-ups. You did nothing wrong. There was a pause before his next message appeared. Mom says we're not going to your house for Christmas like we planned. She says you need space. I hadn't even considered how the Thanksgiving fallout would affect holiday plans. Victoria hosting Thanksgiving was traditional, but Christmas had always been at our cottage, with the twins enjoying the simple pleasures of beachcombing and hot chocolate by our wood stove. Let's not worry about Christmas yet, I replied, unwilling to make promises I might not be able to keep. There's still plenty of time to figure things out. After exchanging a few more messages, I put down the phone with a sigh. Victoria's already rewriting the narrative for the twins. Apparently we need space for Christmas. Classic deflection, James observed. She's making it sound like your choice rather than hers. The twins will be heartbroken if they don't come for Christmas. It's their favorite tradition. James squeezed my shoulder supportively. One bridge at a time, Liv. We still have weeks to navigate the Christmas situation. Evening brought another unexpected development. A formal email from my father's account, though the careful wording suggested my mother's influence. Dear Olivia and James, we wish to extend our sincere apologies for the unfortunate events at Thanksgiving dinner. It has become apparent that there have been significant misunderstandings on all sides. We would like to request a formal dinner at the Harbor Restaurant next Saturday to discuss matters properly and reestablish family harmony. Please confirm your availability at your earliest convenience. With love, Gerald and Diana Chen. I read it aloud to James, unable to keep from laughing at the stiff formality. A formal dinner to reestablish family harmony? It sounds like a diplomatic summit. In a way it is, James pointed out. Your father is approaching this like a business negotiation. It's the framework he understands. And notice there's no actual apology for how they've treated me for years, just regret for the unfortunate events at Thanksgiving. I shook my head in disappointment. They still don't get it. What do you want to do? James asked. I considered my options carefully. I'm not ready for a formal family dinner where everyone pretends everything is fine now that they know you're an admiral. That would just reinforce that they only value status and position. So we decline? For now, I decided. I'll suggest meeting just my parents first. Somewhere casual without Victoria. One battlefield at a time. I crafted a response that was firm but not confrontational, explaining that while I appreciated their outreach, I needed more time to process recent events before a full family gathering. I suggested meeting just the four of us for coffee the following weekend instead. Within minutes, my mother called. I hesitated, then answered, putting the phone on speaker so James could hear. Olivia, darling, my mother began, her voice overly bright. I got your email. I really think a proper dinner would be better. Your father has already made reservations at the harbor. They're so difficult to get, especially during holiday season. Mom, I interrupted gently. I'm not ready for a formal family dinner yet. Victoria called me worthless in front of everyone. That's not something I can just move past because Dad made fancy dinner reservations. Oh, sweetheart, Victoria didn't mean it that way, my mother dismissed. You know how she gets when she's stressed about entertaining. And she feels terrible now. Absolutely terrible. Has she actually said that? I challenged, because her texts to me have been more demanding than apologetic. My mother paused, clearly uncomfortable. Well, she's processing things in her own way. It was quite a shock, finding out that James is, well, who he is. Admiral Chen, James supplied helpfully from beside me. United States Navy. Yes, exactly, my mother said, her voice taking on the deferential tone I was beginning to recognize as her response to James's rank. Such an honor, really. We had no idea. That's the problem, Mom, I said firmly. You're all suddenly respectful now that you know James's position, but nothing has actually changed about either of us as people. We're the same couple you've been looking down on for years. We never looked down on you, she protested. Mom, I said gently, you and Dad have made it clear from the beginning that you thought I was wasting my potential, that my career was a hobby, that James wasn't good enough because he didn't display obvious wealth or status. We were concerned, she insisted. Parents worry. It's what we do. There's a difference between concern and judgment, between support and criticism. A lengthy silence followed before my mother spoke again, her voice smaller. Perhaps we haven't always expressed ourselves well. But we do love you, Olivia. I know you do, I acknowledged, feeling a complex mixture of frustration and compassion. That's why I suggested coffee next weekend, just the four of us. A chance to talk honestly without the pressure of a formal setting. After some negotiation, she reluctantly agreed to the coffee meeting, though she couldn't resist adding, "Your father will be disappointed about the reservation." After the call ended, I leaned back against the couch, emotionally drained. That's one hurdle cleared, I suppose. Your mother is trying in her way, James observed. She's just never had to question her assumptions about success and status before. I'm not sure she's capable of it, I admitted. Their entire social circle operates on those same values. It would mean reevaluating their whole lives. People can change when properly motivated, James said. Finding out their underachieving daughter has been doing work important enough to influence naval policy and their supposedly unambitious son-in-law is an admiral might just be motivation enough. Maybe, I conceded, though not entirely convinced. But I don't want their approval if it's only based on these external markers of success. I want them to value me for who I am, not what my husband's rank is or how my research is being used. That's a big ask for people who've spent decades judging worth by material success, James pointed out. It might take time. Or it might never happen completely. And I need to be okay with that possibility, I realized. My worth isn't dependent on their validation. Exactly. James smiled approvingly. Now you're getting it. The next morning brought another surprise. An email from the Secretary of the Navy's office, with the subject line, Civilian Consultant Position, Environmental Protection Division. Opening it with trembling fingers, I found the formal offer James had mentioned, outlining a position that seemed tailor-made for my expertise. Developing protocols for minimizing the environmental impact of naval operations in sensitive marine ecosystems. The salary figure made me gasp out loud, nearly triple what I'd earned at the Research Institute. James, this can't be right. Is this standard for a consultant position? He glanced at the figure and nodded. That's the approved rate for someone with your expertise and clearance level. The Navy values specialized knowledge, Liv, and yours is pretty much unique in this field. I stared at the screen, trying to process the implications. This would change everything financially. We could pay off my student loans in months, not years. If that's what you want to do with it, James agreed. Or we could save for a research vessel of your own someday. Or travel to study marine ecosystems around the world when my duties permit. The point is, we'll have options. Options. The word resonated deeply. For years, I'd felt constrained by financial limitations, making choices based on necessity rather than preference. Now, suddenly, doors were opening that I hadn't even known existed. I think, I said slowly, that I'm going to need some time to adjust to all this. It's like my entire perception of myself and my place in the world has shifted overnight. Quote, "That's perfectly normal," James assured me. "Identity adjustments don't happen instantaneously. Be patient with yourself." As I sat looking at the offer letter, I realized that the consulting position represented more than just financial security or professional advancement. It was tangible proof that my work mattered, that the path I'd chosen despite my family's disapproval had been worthwhile all along. I'm going to accept it, I decided, feeling a surge of confidence. Not because of the money, but because it's meaningful work that aligns with my values. James smiled proudly. That's my girl. Always making choices based on purpose rather than profit. Well, I amended with a small laugh, the profit doesn't hurt either. No, he agreed. It certainly doesn't. As the weekend progressed, I found myself experiencing waves of different emotions. Lingering anger at Victoria's cruelty, confusion about James's long deception, excitement about my new professional opportunity, and underlying it all, a growing sense of liberation from my family's expectations. By Sunday evening, I felt ready to face the week ahead, including the security clearance process that would begin once I formally accepted the consulting position. James would return to his base duties on Monday, no longer needing to maintain the fiction of vague maritime operations work. It's going to be strange, I mused as we prepared for bed. You leaving for work in your uniform instead of casual clothes. Everyone knowing you're Admiral Chen instead of just James. At home, I'll always be just James, he promised. The rank stays at the door. I smiled, grateful for his understanding. And I'll always be just Olivia, the woman who loves tide pools and marine conservation, regardless of who values that or doesn't. That's the woman I fell in love with, James said, pulling me close. Not Admiral Chen's wife or the Navy's new environmental consultant. Just Olivia Chen, marine biologist and passionate defender of oceans. As I drifted toward sleep, I realized that the pain of Victoria's cruel words was already beginning to fade, replaced by a new certainty about my own value independent of others' judgments. Being called worthless had paradoxically helped me recognize my true worth, not as defined by family expectations or societal standards, but by the impact of my work and the authenticity of my choices. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. James returning to his official duties, my acceptance of the consulting position, the beginning of security clearance procedures. But for the first time in memory, I would face those challenges, without the weight of seeking validation from people who measured success by metrics that had never mattered to me. Worthless, I thought as sleep claimed me. What a powerless word it became when you finally understood your own value. 3 months after that fateful Thanksgiving, I stood at the window of my new office at the Naval Research Facility, watching winter waves crash against the rocky Maine coastline. The view was similar to the one from our cottage, but my perspective had shifted dramatically. The gold-framed certificate on my wall, my recently approved top-secret security clearance, was just one visible symbol of how much had changed since Victoria had called me worthless and James had revealed his true identity. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Eliza Yamamoto, the lead oceanographer on our environmental impact assessment team. Meeting in 5 minutes. Bringing the satellite data you requested. I smiled, still not quite used to leading a team of brilliant scientists who treated my expertise with unquestioning respect. In the 12 weeks since accepting the civilian consultant position, I'd assembled a research group focused on minimizing the environmental footprint of naval operations in vulnerable marine ecosystems. Our preliminary findings were already influencing policy discussions at the highest levels of military environmental planning. As I gathered my notes for the meeting, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. Hair pulled back in a practical bun, minimal makeup, wearing the same kind of simple professional clothing I'd always favored. Externally, I looked much the same as before. But internally, everything had transformed. The journey hadn't been simple or linear. The weeks following Thanksgiving had brought challenges I couldn't have anticipated, both professionally and personally. The coffee meeting with my parents had been awkward and stilted, with my father alternating between treating James with newfound deference and struggling to understand why I wasn't more appreciative of their concerns about my career. My mother had made earnest but clumsy attempts to mend fences, bringing up childhood memories as if they could paper over years of conditional approval. "We always supported your interests, Olivia," she'd insisted, stirring her latte nervously. "Remember how we bought you that little microscope when you were 10? After I begged for 6 months?" I'd reminded her gently. And then you enrolled me in beauty pageants the following year because you thought I was spending too much time with bugs and fish instead of developing social graces. The conversation had continued in that vein, my parents rewriting history to cast themselves as supportive, me gently but firmly correcting their selective memories. James had remained mostly silent, allowing me to navigate the complex terrain of family reconciliation on my own terms, while providing quiet support through his presence. By the end of that first meeting, we'd reached an uneasy truce. My parents had agreed to respect my boundaries regarding Victoria, acknowledging that my relationship with my sister would require more time and space to heal, if it ever did. In return, I'd promised to maintain regular contact with them, including occasional family dinners, but only if they could refrain from commentary on my career choices or lifestyle. Victoria had been a different matter entirely. After 2 weeks of increasingly demanding texts and calls, she'd finally sent an email that she clearly considered an apology but read more like a justification. Olivia, I regret that my choice of words at Thanksgiving upset you. That was not my intention. As your older sister, I've always pushed you because I saw your potential. Perhaps my methods were sometimes harsh, but they came from a place of wanting the best for you. Now that I understand your husband's position and the importance of your research, I can see that you've found your own path to success, even if it's not the traditional one I envisioned for you. I hope we can move forward as a family without dwelling on an unfortunate verbal misstep made in the heat of the moment. I'd shown the email to James, who had raised an eyebrow at Victoria's careful avoidance of the word apologize, and her focus on my husband's position rather than my own accomplishments. Classic non-apology apology, he'd observed. The question is, what do you want to do about it? That question had forced me to examine what I truly wanted from my relationship with Victoria. Did I need a genuine acknowledgement of how deeply her words had hurt me? Was I seeking revenge, wanting her to feel as small as she'd made me feel? Or was I simply ready to establish new boundaries that protected my hard-won sense of self-worth? After much reflection, I'd responded with a brief but honest email. Victoria, I appreciate you reaching out. What you said at Thanksgiving, calling me worthless, wasn't a verbal misstep. It was the culmination of years of judgment and dismissal. I believe you when you say you wanted the best for me, but your vision of best was always about external validation and status symbols that don't align with my values. I'm not interested in your approval now that you know James's rank, or that my research has prestigious applications. I'm the same person I was before Thanksgiving, doing the same valuable work I've always done. Until you can see and respect that, I think it's best we maintain some distance. I wish you well, but I need to protect the sense of self-worth I've fought hard to develop. Victoria hadn't responded directly to my email, but through my mother I'd learned she was deeply hurt by my inability to accept her olive branch. The old me would have immediately backtracked, apologizing for causing pain and compromising my boundaries to maintain family harmony. The new me recognized that Victoria's hurt feelings weren't my responsibility to manage, especially when they stemmed from my refusal to accept a non-apology that centered her intentions rather than the impact of her actions. The twins had been the unexpected bridge in the fractured family landscape. Alexander and Nicholas had continued texting me regularly, sharing school projects and asking questions about marine life. With Victoria's reluctant permission, James and I had taken them tide pooling one Saturday in January, a day that had reminded me of the innocent joy of scientific discovery I'd felt as a child. Aunt Olivia, look at this! Nicholas had called, pointing excitedly at a tiny sea star clinging to a rock. Is it a baby? It's a juvenile blood star, I'd explained, kneeling beside him on the wet sand. See the reddish color? That's where it gets its name. Will it get huge like the ones in your books? Alexander had asked, already sketching the specimen in the waterproof notebook I'd given him for Christmas. Not huge, but definitely bigger than this. Maybe the size of your palm when it's fully grown. Their enthusiasm had been infectious, their minds uncluttered by the status concerns that dominated adult perspectives. They didn't care that their Uncle James was an admiral, or that their Aunt Olivia's research influenced naval policy. They cared about tide pools and fossils, and the mysterious creatures that inhabited the ocean's edge. Mom says you're important now, Alexander had mentioned casually as we'd walked back to the car. But I thought you were always important. "You know more about the ocean than anyone." His innocent observation had brought tears to my eyes. This child had instinctively understood what my own sister had never grasped. That importance wasn't conferred by titles or recognized by authorities. It existed in passion, knowledge, and the impact you created, whether or not others acknowledged it. The memory of that day warmed me as I headed to my meeting, nodding to the security personnel who had become familiar faces over the past months. The facility where I worked was an unassuming building that most locals assumed was a standard research center, with no external indicators of its military connections. Inside, however, it housed cutting-edge technology and some of the brightest scientific minds in the country, all focused on understanding and protecting marine environments while balancing national security needs. Dr. Yamamoto was already in the conference room when I arrived, along with Dr. Marcus Way, our climate modeling specialist, and Lieutenant Commander Sofia Rodriguez, our military liaison. The fourth seat remained empty. James occasionally joined our meetings when his schedule permitted, though he was careful to maintain appropriate professional boundaries despite our personal relationship. "The satellite data confirms your hypothesis, Dr. Chen," Eliza began without preamble, sliding a tablet across the table. "The acoustic testing in the North Atlantic is creating disruption patterns that extend much further than previously modeled, particularly affecting the migration routes of 3 endangered whale species. I studied the data, noting the clear correlation between naval exercises and altered marine mammal behavior. We need to adjust the protocols immediately. These patterns suggest the current safety zones are inadequate by at least 40%. Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez frowned slightly. Expanding the safety zones by that much would significantly impact operational capabilities. The Admiralty won't approve it without compelling evidence. "This is compelling evidence," I countered, indicating the data patterns. "And if they want more, I can provide detailed analysis of potential marine ecosystem collapse scenarios if these disruptions continue. The question isn't whether we can afford to expand the safety zones, but whether we can afford not to." 3 months ago, I might have softened my position, worried about seeming too aggressive or uncooperative. Today, I spoke with the confidence of someone who knew her expertise was valuable and necessary, even when it created institutional challenges. Dr. Way nodded in agreement. "The modeling suggests that without intervention, we're looking at potential population collapse for the North Atlantic right whale within a decade. That would trigger automatic regulatory responses that would be far more restrictive than the preventative measures Dr. Chen is suggesting." The discussion continued for nearly an hour, with Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez gradually shifting from skepticism to tentative support as the evidence mounted. By the time the meeting concluded, we had developed a modified protocol that balanced operational needs with environmental protection, a compromise that would save whale populations while still allowing essential naval activities. As the others gathered their materials to leave, the door opened and James entered, his uniform impeccable as always when he was on official business. "I apologize for missing the meeting," he said formally. "I was delayed by a call with Washington." "No worries, Admiral," Dr. Way responded. Dr. Chen kept us all on track as usual. I smiled at the casual compliment, still not entirely used to the professional respect that now surrounded me. Once the others had departed, James closed the door and his posture relaxed slightly. "How did it go?" he asked, dropping the formal tone he maintained when we were at the facility. "Productive," I replied. "We've got compelling data about the acoustic testing impact." Rodriguez pushed back initially, but she came around when she saw the numbers. James nodded approvingly. "Your team's developing a reputation for solid science that can't be easily dismissed, even by the old guard who resist environmental considerations." "That's the goal," I agreed. Change happens when the evidence becomes too compelling to ignore. We maintained professional distance during working hours, both to preserve appropriate boundaries and to ensure my accomplishments were recognized as my own, rather than attributed to my connection to James. But in private moments like this, we allowed ourselves to acknowledge the unique partnership we'd developed, personal and professional worlds carefully separated but mutually supportive. "Dinner at home tonight?" James asked as we prepared to return to our respective duties. Or should we try that new seafood place in Portland? The question was simple, mundane even, but it represented something profound, the freedom to choose based on preference rather than financial constraint. My new position's salary, combined with James's, had transformed our financial landscape completely. We'd paid off my student loans, established healthy retirement accounts, and still had enough for occasional indulgences that would have been unthinkable before. Home, I think, I decided. I'm experimenting with that sustainable seafood cookbook. The scallop recipe looks promising. James smiled, the private smile that was reserved just for me. Home it is, then. I'll pick up a bottle of that Sauvignon Blanc you liked. As we parted ways in the hallway, he to a video conference with Naval Command, me to my research lab, I marveled at how naturally we'd adapted to our new reality. The Admiral and the environmental consultant, maintaining our simple lifestyle by choice rather than necessity, finding balance between high-pressure careers and the quiet pleasures of our coastal home. Later that afternoon, as I analyzed core samples from a recent expedition, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. Your father and I would like to host a small dinner next Saturday. Just family. Victoria and Bradley will be there with the twins. Please consider coming. The boys miss you. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest that accompanied any mention of Victoria. We hadn't spoken directly since our email exchange nearly 3 months ago, though we'd been in the same room twice for brief family gatherings where we'd maintained a cool civility for the sake of our parents and the twins. Before I could decide how to respond, another text arrived. Victoria has something she wants to tell you in person. She says it's important. Curiosity mingled with wariness as I considered what Victoria might need to say that required an in-person meeting. Part of me, the part still healing from the wound of being called worthless, wanted to refuse outright. But another part recognized that healing sometimes required facing difficult conversations rather than avoiding them. I texted James about the invitation, and his response was supportive but non-committal. Your call, Liv. I'll back whatever decision you make. After contemplating it through the remainder of my workday, I finally responded to my mother. We'll come, but I need you to understand that I'm still establishing boundaries with Victoria. If things become uncomfortable, we'll leave. My mother's reply came instantly. Of course, dear. We just want the family together. Dinner at 6:30. Casual attire. The addition of casual attire made me smile. A small acknowledgement that not every family gathering needed to be a formal production designed to impress. That evening, as James and I enjoyed the scallops that had turned out even better than expected, I shared my apprehensions about the upcoming dinner. What do you think Victoria wants to tell me? I wondered, swirling the wine in my glass. It's not like her to request a family meeting for something personal. James considered the question thoughtfully. Hard to say. Best case scenario? A genuine apology. Worst case? Some kind of performative reconciliation attempt that centers her feelings rather than your experience. You've become quite the Victoria analyst, I observed with a smile. 4 years of observing family dynamics from the periphery, he replied. You notice patterns when you're not directly involved in the emotional currents. I nodded, acknowledging the truth in his observation. Whatever it is, I feel stronger now, more secure in who I am and what I'm worth. 3 months ago, I was still seeking validation from my family. Now I understand that my value exists independently of their recognition. That's the biggest change I've seen in you, James said, reaching across the table to take my hand. Not the job title or the security clearance or the professional respect. It's that internal certainty that shines through everything you do now. His words warmed me more than any professional accolade could. It's strange how being called worthless ultimately helped me recognize my true worth. Sometimes we need the contrast to see clearly, James agreed. The darkness that helps us appreciate the light. The week passed quickly, filled with research breakthroughs and promising developments in our environmental protection protocols. By Saturday evening, as we drove to my parents' house for the mysterious family dinner, I felt centered and calm, curious but not anxious about what Victoria might have to say. My parents' home looked welcoming in the early spring twilight, daffodils beginning to bloom along the walkway, lights glowing warmly in the windows. My mother greeted us at the door with careful hugs, her eyes darting between us as if checking for signs of distress or reluctance. "James, Olivia, thank you for coming," she said, ushering us inside. "Everyone's in the living room. Just keeping things casual, as requested." The living room presented a tableau of forced normality. My father pretending to be absorbed in a golf magazine, Bradley checking his phone as usual, the twins playing a board game on the coffee table. Victoria stood by the fireplace, more casually dressed than I'd seen her in years, in simple black pants and a blue sweater, rather than her usual designer outfits. Her hair was different too, cut into a practical bob instead of the elaborate style she'd maintained for as long as I could remember. "Aunt Olivia! Uncle James!" The twins abandoned their game to greet us with enthusiastic hugs. "Did you bring any new fossils?" Alexander asked hopefully. James laughed, producing 2 small packages from his pocket. "What kind of uncle would I be if I didn't?" As the boys eagerly unwrapped their treasures, fossilized fern imprints this time, Victoria approached hesitantly, her usual confidence notably absent. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." "Mom said you had something important to discuss," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. The twins were a strong incentive too. Victoria glanced at the boys, now showing their fossils to my father, who was making an admirable effort to appear interested. "They've missed you. We all have." Before I could respond to this unexpected sentiment, my mother announced that dinner was ready, and we moved to the dining room where a simple but elegant meal awaited. The conversation remained deliberately light throughout the first course. The twins' school activities, local news, safe topics that skimmed the surface of family interaction without diving into emotional depths. It wasn't until dessert was served, my mother's famous apple pie, a childhood favorite, that Victoria finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months," she began, setting down her fork with deliberate care. "And some work with a therapist, actually." This admission surprised me. Victoria had always dismissed therapy as unnecessary navel-gazing for people without proper coping skills. "I've come to recognize some patterns in my behavior," she continued, her voice steady but vulnerable in a way I'd never heard before. "Particularly how I've treated you, Olivia." The table fell silent, everyone watching this unprecedented moment unfold. "When I called you worthless at Thanksgiving," Victoria said, meeting my eyes directly, "it wasn't really about you at all. It was about me, my insecurities, my narrow definition of success, my need to feel superior to validate my own choices." I remained silent, waiting to see if this was leading to a genuine apology or another sophisticated deflection. "The truth is," she continued, "I've been jealous of you for years." "Jealous?" I couldn't contain my surprise. "Of me? Victoria, you have everything. The career, the house, the status symbols you've always valued." "I have things," she corrected softly. "But you have purpose, passion, the courage to pursue what matters to you regardless of external validation. I've spent my entire adult life chasing approval. From our parents, from colleagues, from society, accumulating achievements and possessions that were supposed to make me feel fulfilled, but never quite did." She glanced at Bradley, who nodded encouragingly. Another surprise, as he rarely engaged emotionally in family matters. "When James revealed his position," Victoria continued, "it forced me to confront the emptiness of my value system. Here was someone with genuine achievement and authority who chose to live simply, without flaunting status or accumulating excessive possessions. It made me question everything I thought I knew about success." My father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I wondered if Victoria's words were striking a similar chord with him. "I'm not saying this to make excuses," Victoria clarified. "What I said to you was cruel and inexcusable, regardless of my own internal struggles. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I see you now, really see you, and I understand how wrong I've been all these years." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I am deeply, genuinely sorry, Olivia, not just for what I said at Thanksgiving, but for every dismissive comment, every condescending remark, every time I made you feel less than, because your path didn't match my narrow definition of success. You were never worthless. You were courageous in ways I couldn't comprehend, because I was too afraid to follow my own passions." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, and I felt the hard shell of resentment I'd built around my heart begin to crack. Thank you for saying that, Victoria. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge the impact your words had. There's more, she said, glancing again at Bradley. I've made some significant changes in my life since Thanksgiving. I've stepped down from my VP position. You what? My mother couldn't contain her shock. But Victoria, you worked so hard for that promotion. I did, Victoria agreed, and I was miserable in it. 60-hour weeks, constant stress, never seeing the twins except when they were already half asleep. Chasing bigger bonuses to buy more things we didn't need to impress people I didn't even like. But what will you do instead? My father asked, clearly struggling to process this development. Victoria's expression softened. I've accepted a position with the Ocean Conservation Alliance, heading their corporate responsibility division. It's a significant pay cut, but the work is meaningful, helping businesses develop sustainable practices that protect marine ecosystems. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. The Ocean Conservation Alliance was a respected environmental organization that I'd collaborated with occasionally during my research institute days. Your research was part of what inspired the change, Victoria admitted. After Thanksgiving, I started reading your published papers, trying to understand what you found so compelling about marine biology. What began as an attempt to understand you became genuinely fascinating to me. I found myself caring about ocean acidification and plastic pollution in ways I never expected. Wow. I struggled to find adequate words for the magnitude of this revelation. That's an incredible shift, Victoria. It feels right, she said simply. For the first time in my adult life, I'm making choices based on what matters to me, not what impresses others. She turned to include James in her gaze. I owe you both an apology, but also thanks. Your authenticity, living according to your values rather than external expectations, helped me recognize how far I had strayed from my own. James nodded acknowledgement, but wisely remained silent, allowing this moment to remain centered on the healing beginning between my sister and me. I don't expect everything to be magically fixed, Victoria added. I know I've hurt you deeply and repeatedly. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness or for things to go back to how they were, especially since how they were wasn't healthy. I'm just hoping we can begin building something new, something better, based on mutual respect rather than competition and judgment. As I looked at my sister, really looked at her beyond the designer clothes and carefully constructed facade, I saw something I'd never noticed before: vulnerability, sincerity, and the courage it took to publicly acknowledge such profound mistakes. I'd like that, I said finally. A new beginning. The tension that had gripped the table throughout Victoria's speech visibly dissipated. The twins, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the adult conversation, suddenly burst into excited chatter. Does this mean Aunt Olivia and Uncle James will come for Christmas again? Nicholas asked hopefully. And can we still go tide pooling? Alexander added. Mom says she wants to come too next time. Victoria laughed, a genuine laugh without the brittle edge that had characterized her for so long. Yes to both, if Aunt Olivia agrees. I have a lot to learn about marine ecosystems, and she's the best teacher I know. As the evening continued, I observed my family with new eyes. Victoria discussing environmental initiatives with genuine enthusiasm, my parents slowly adjusting to this new family dynamic, the twins delighted by the restoration of harmony among the adults they loved. Later, as James and I drove home under a canopy of stars, I reflected on the remarkable journey of the past 3 months. I never expected Victoria to change so fundamentally, I admitted. I'm still processing it. People can surprise you when they're finally forced to confront the emptiness of misplaced values, James observed. Your sister had a moment of clarity at Thanksgiving, even if it took her months to fully acknowledge it. I nodded, remembering Victoria's words about jealousy and insecurity. It's strange to think that while I was envying her apparent success, she was envying my sense of purpose. The grass is always greener, James agreed. But the truly fertile ground is where you nurture what matters most to you, regardless of how it looks to others. As our cottage came into view, warm light glowing from the windows against the dark coastal landscape, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the painful but transformative journey that had begun with those cruel words at Thanksgiving. Being called worthless had set in motion a chain of revelations that had not only strengthened my own sense of worth but had somehow helped my sister discover hers as well. "You know what's ironic?" I said as we walked hand in hand toward our front door. "If you had revealed your position years ago, Victoria might have respected us sooner, but she never would have experienced this genuine transformation. She would have just transferred her value system to include military rank as another status symbol. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most meaningful destinations," James replied philosophically. "For both of you, inside our modest home, the home we continued to choose despite having options for something grander, I felt the truth of his words settle deep in my bones. My worth had never been determined by my sister's judgment, my parents' approval, or even my husband's prestigious position. It had always existed in the integrity of my choices, the impact of my work, and the authenticity with which I lived my values." That night, as I drifted toward sleep with the sound of waves crashing against the shore outside our window, I realized that being called worthless had ultimately been a gift. The painful catalyst that had freed both me and, surprisingly, my sister from the prison of external validation. In finding my worth independent of others' assessment, I had somehow helped Victoria begin discovering hers as well. Sometimes, I reflected drowsily, the cruelest words can lead to the most profound healing, not because they contain truth, but because they force us to recognize the truth we've known all along, that our worth is inherent, not assigned, and that living authentically is the only success that truly matters. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.